Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Supreme Court. My name is Vicky Bock, and I'm the tutor here, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening with our first partnership event with Black and the Charter. And I'd also like to extend a really warm welcome to everybody who is online this evening. The court signed back the Charter last summer, and it's part of our way of actively demonstrating bold commitment to ensuring Black lawyers progress and flourish across the entire legal profession. So it's just one opportunity for the court to play a big part. From the moment Laura, Harry and I met and first started talking about an event like this, I knew it was going to be a really great evening. So I very much hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping points for everybody. For our guests in court, there's no scheduled fire drill tonight. So if you hear the alarm, please follow our security staff and Supreme Court staff, and they will help you out of the building. And for our guests online, we invite you to submit your questions through the live chat function, and we'll be monitoring that in a wait for them until you get us. And I'd just like to remind everybody that tonight's event is being recorded and it will be made available on the UK Supreme Court and Black Talent Charter communication channels. That will be me, and it gives me great pleasure to pass the field to all the end of the evening.
I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the Supreme Court this evening, and delighted that the Court is partnering with Black Talent Charter to champion the advancement of talented Black men and women in the legal profession. When I became the President of the Court, I made improving diversity one of my priorities. For me, this is a question of justice. Every lawyer is entitled to the same opportunity to progress in their career and to apply for a judicial appointment. And of course, diversity is also important in order to maintain public confidence in the courts. Making this court more diverse takes time. Vacancies only arise on a retirement, and even then, the candidates generally come from courts which are not, or the other bodies, which are not themselves representative of the population. So the court is actively working to increase the diversity of lawyers at earlier stages of the career pipeline. For example, by introducing internships for aspiring lawyers from underrepresented groups, and we'll be welcoming the next group of them here next week. And by using webinars to encourage mid-career professionals, particularly from underrepresented groups, to consider joining the judiciary and to help them to plan for that possibility in their careers. Attracting, developing, and retaining a diverse judiciary is essential to the courts and the public that we serve. The public have to be confident that judges understand the cases before them and will deliver justice fairly. And that can be difficult if the bench is not diverse. We also need to ensure that we are recruiting the highest quality lawyers as judges. And if a section of our society is left out, then inevitably we'll miss out on talented people. I was disappointed to read in a report published by the Law Society last year that Black judges make up just over 1% of the judiciary in England and Wales, a figure that has barely changed since 2014. Similar underrepresentation can also be seen at the senior levels of the legal profession. Just over 1% of KCs are Black, and out of more than 13,000 partners at major law firms, only 90 are Black. Clearly, as a profession, we must take action to increase the pace of change. I hope that none of you will ever talk yourself out of aiming for an ambitious career in the law, because you don't currently see many senior practitioners or judges who look like you. I don't underestimate how challenging that must be, and it's one of the reasons why events like this are important. But we need committed and talented people like you, to progress and to apply for judicial roles. I know that the legal profession will be stronger and richer for the contributions that you make. And as you progress in your careers, you can know that you will have the Supreme Court's support, and that we'll be doing what we can to help remove barriers and encourage change. That's why we're here tonight. The responsibility for effecting change is a collective one, but the Supreme Court, like a number of other organisations, can play a leadership role. In 2021, we published our first judicial diversity and inclusion strategy, which sets out our aim to support the progress of underrepresented groups at every stage of their legal career and into judicial roles. As part of this work, we want to build strong links with organisations which can help us to learn from the experience of underrepresented groups. That's why I was so pleased that the Court became a signatory of the Black Talent Charter earlier this year. We're going to hear from some outstanding black lawyers this evening, and I'm sure we will learn from the discussion. I'm grateful to be working with the Charter and with all of you towards a future where there will be equal opportunity for black people to flourish in the legal profession.
Good evening. Hi, it's wonderful to see you all, many familiar faces and some new faces. Looking forward to a really great discussion this evening in these somewhat intimidating or inspiring surroundings, although I have to say these seats are very comfortable, so I'm not sure you're going to get me out of them. So anyone who's aspiring to sit here, I'd recommend it, it's lovely. And we have some seats nearer the front. If anyone can't hear or they want to move forward, please, there's no hierarchy in the court today, so please do feel free to move to the front if you want to do so. A little bit about me, and I'll then let the other panelists introduce themselves. So I'm the Chief Executive of the Black Talent Charter. For those that don't know what that is, we are building a movement for change, a signatory cohort of which the Supreme Court is part, that is focused on some might say obvious and simplistic goal, which is to increase the representation of black talent in British business to match population demographics within 10 years. But it's actually a very ambitious goal because we've got some data that will be coming out soon from one of our signatories, Bain, that shows that organically, left without intervention, that will take up to about 70 years because the population is becoming more diverse, and despite the best effort, the commitments made in 2020, it is not happening. The bar is an important part of that, what it represents, the justice system generally, the solicitor's profession is all incredibly important as part of our efforts. So this is a really important event for us, and we were absolutely delighted that the Supreme Court was willing to come on board as a signatory this year. That was brilliant for us. The panel session today, we're going to be looking at the amazing people around me who will introduce themselves, their careers, some of their observations on the challenge, why it matters, and what one can do to change this agenda and move it forward, which will be wonderful. And we very much welcome questions. So as Vicky said, please do provide questions online. They are being monitored and they will be fed to us by the magic of Vicky receiving a WhatsApp, I think, and also questions in the room. So please do make a note as questions arise. We will have a decent time for Q&A. So that would be wonderful. Let me come first on my right to Lord Leggett, Judge. I'd be grateful if you would introduce yourself.
Oh, good evening, everybody. I'm a justice of this court. Before I became a judge, I practiced as a barrister for, in my count, I think 28 years. All that time was spent in the same chambers, which is the same chambers as Harry Matovu, KC, in fact, who I'm delighted to see here this evening. Outside my work as a barrister, I did a lot of voluntary work, as I would call it, for the Bar Council, and then I was the first vice chair of the Bar Standards Board. All that was involved in regulation of the profession, essentially, matters of professional conduct, professional standards. One of the highlights of that experience was when I was vice chair of the Professional Standards Committee of the Bar Council, and the chair, whom I worked with then and greatly admired, was Linda Dobbs, who was the first black barrister to become a High Court judge. I became a High Court judge myself in 2012, that's 11 years ago now, assigned to the Queen's Bench Division, as it was then called, and then I was promoted to the Court of Appeal in 2018 and to this court in April 2020, which was just as the court was going into lockdown at the start of the pandemic, so my first 15 months on the court were a sort of virtual experience, all online, but since then I've been here in the building hearing cases, so it's 3 years now I think I've been here. And last year, Lord Reid, who you've just heard from, asked if I would take the lead on the work that the court does in the area of diversity and inclusion. I should make it clear that that has nothing to do with appointments to the court or the judiciary, but it's leading the work that we do and try to do in promoting diversity, inclusion in the judiciary and the legal profession more broadly.
Thank you.
That's me.
And Dr. I. Stephanie Boyce. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So I'm I. Stephanie Boyce, former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, and in March 2021 I took my seat at the table, my place in the history books, when I became the first person of colour to become president of the Law Society. And I hope most people know what or who the Law Society is, but it's the professional body for over 200,000 solicitors across England and Wales. And a bit like yourself, Lord Legate, coming to the post at a time where we were in lockdown. The start of my presidency was virtual, but having to lead the profession through a number of once-in-a-lifetime crises, such as the COVID pandemic, the withdrawal in Afghanistan, the war in Ukraine, and over 70 ministerial resignations. And those were just external factors that were going on. But you know, being the steady hand on the tiller and leading the profession through those choppy waters.
Thank you. Harry Matovu, KC.
Thank you, Laura. I, as Lord Legate has explained, have been a barrister in the same chambers as he, in my case for 30 plus years. I'm now in Silk. I practice commercial law, international arbitration and litigation, and I'm also the chair of the Black Talent Charter, and I came to be the chair before the murder of George Floyd. I started thinking quite hard as a senior barrister of colour about why it was that I am the only black face, not only in my chambers, but in the so-called magic circle set of the commercial bar. That was in 2018-2019. The position has marginally improved, but only marginally, and it's always staggered me that I should be perceived to be one of very few black heritage lawyers who has been considered sufficiently able to do the sort of work that we do at the commercial bar. It simply cannot be right. Common sense is defied by that proposition. And that is why I started thinking hard about what I could do individually to change that situation. And in thinking of that, it seemed to me that we shouldn't just deal with the law, but that this is a systemic societal problem, and that is why, as Laura has said, we're looking at the whole of the business world, because the problems and the perceptions and the stereotypes against black people are pervasive throughout the business and the professional world. We have a huge ambition at the Charter, and we are proud of that ambition. And I hope that you're going to help us to realise it by telling us what we should be doing.
Thank you, Harry. And last but certainly not least, Elain Banton.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm an equality, employment, discrimination, human rights lawyer. I deal with quite protracted and high-profile litigation, very often cases that are reported. So, for example, I've been Times Lawyer of the Week, I've been the Lawyer's Barrister of the Week, and I recently acted for Maria Rooney in a menopausal discrimination claim that was supported by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I also hold positions of equality and diversity for the profession, such as since 2019 I've been chairing the Bar Council's Equality, Diversity and Social Mobility Committee, co-chairing that, and it meant that I was in a position at the time of the events of George Floyd to advocate for a race working group, which I was able to do. So when we had a statement issued, and of course that race working group has really led to a lot of, I think, practical changes and certainly proliferated a lot of discussions in the bar. I'm also a member of the Intercourt Alliance for Women, and I regularly write and broadcast in the areas of discrimination law. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you can see, a brilliant panel. So please do get the creative juices flowing in terms of what you want to ask them if I don't cover it. So thinking first here, it's the clue is in the name, Black Talent Charter. We are moving away from a general focus on diversity, BAME, and sometimes people raise questions about that. Why black? Why is it? If you fix it for all, don't you fix it for each individual sector? We say no. It's more complicated than that. So thinking about generally the case for diversity in the law and on the bench, does the advancement of black representation in the profession and the judiciary matter in a plural society? What is the case for this? Judge, can I come to you first on that, please?
Yes, well, of course it matters, and it matters, I think, for two fundamental reasons. There are others too, no doubt, but these are the ones that are most important to me. Lord Reid has mentioned them already, but I'll put them in my own way. The first is a fundamental question of fairness and equality. Everyone in our society, regardless of their background or colour, should have a fair and equal opportunity to develop their talents and progress their chosen career on the basis of hard work and ability. That should be obvious. But I'm afraid it's equally obvious that that is not happening in the legal profession. And that is basically an injustice. It's all the more to be regretted in a profession whose business is the pursuit of justice. Now, I'll leave the statistics to others who will be more familiar with them. But speaking from my own experience, the only time I see black barristers in cases is in the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. Actually, I see a lot of black barristers because we have about a third of our cases in the work here is not sitting in the Supreme Court, but we hear appeals from territories and countries which still have the Privy Council here as their final court of appeal. And we frequently have black barristers in front of us in those cases, excellent advocates often, but never, so far in my experience here, have I had a black barrister arguing a case in the Supreme Court, and something is wrong in that situation. And the second reason why I think it matters is the question of legitimacy. The legitimacy of the law and the legal system depends on it being seen to be operating fairly and in the interests of the whole of society. And that legitimacy is undermined if one very visible part of our society, black people, is very largely invisible amongst the senior judiciary and the senior members of the legal profession. So that's the second key reason to me why the advancement of black representation is an issue of pressing importance.
Thank you. And we'll hear in a moment, I know Elaine has the statistics at her fingertips to put this into context, but Stephanie, coming to you next, people might say, well, the solicitor profession is the answer to this. From your perspective, how does the advancement of black representation work in that wider context? And is the solicitor's profession the answer to the judiciary being diverse in a plural society?
Well, I mean, absolutely, solicitors make up the bulk of applications to the judiciary. The difficulty is, of course, is that we also make up the bulk of those leaving the judiciary because of those barriers, some hidden, some seen, that are preventing advancement for colleagues in the profession. And of course, we've heard the suggestion that if the legal profession, the bar, the solicitor profession, becomes more diverse, that will cure the issue. But if I may say this, public confidence in the legitimacy of the judiciary is sustained by judges who reflect the people they serve. And if the judiciary is not drawn from the widest pool and background, it will inevitably miss out on talented individuals. And this point cannot be made enough. But if I just remind people what I said as president in March 2021, or maybe it's March 2022, but there is virtually no chance of achieving a diverse judiciary that mirrors diverse Britain because of the very recruitment process that claims to deliver that goal has failed. And of course, Jack, the Judicial Appointments Commission, and this was what I was quoted as saying at the time, spends a great deal of his time promoting the case for minimal change. But the need for reform is clear, and so too is the need to engage with key stakeholders. And we've already heard about the percentage of those black colleagues in the judiciary, which is low, figure that hasn't changed. The Law Society says it will take 120 years till 2149 before underrepresentation in the judiciary is served. And then I went on to say at the time that part of the problem is the JAC is misinterpreting the statutory consultation rules, and a practice that some commentators refer to as secret soundings over suitable candidates, rather than as a process of identifying what experience and abilities go to make up a good judge. And rather than trying to justify a failed process, the JSC should engage with what it actually delivers. And there is no doubt that applicants from underrepresented backgrounds are much less likely to be successful in making it through judicial selection. And of course, the JSC instigated a review of the statutory consultation process by the Work Psychology Group. And of course, the WPG identified numerous ways in which, as currently operated, statutory consultation potentially has an unfair impact on some candidates. And of course, the JC responded at the time and said there was no direct evidence that statutory consultation process impacts disproportionately on recommendations for appointment for any group based on protected characteristics or professional background. And of course, the point is, no evidence doesn't prove a thing. And if the perception is that a lack of diversity is because of secret sounding statutory consultation, then the perception is there. And we know that a diverse pool of candidates is applying, and as I said, from the solicitor profession. They're just not making it through the process in the same numbers. So it's time for the whole appointment system to be overhauled so that we do achieve a more diverse judiciary. And if we want the judiciary to be the best it can be, diversity matters. Diverse members, through their experience and knowledge, would add to the strength of the court and the weight of its decisions.
Thank you. Gosh, so yes, very interesting. So we've heard Elaine. Process is a challenge from Stephanie, and that is potentially translating into what Lord Leggett described with only lawyers appearing from Commonwealth nations appearing before him and no black counsel appearing before you, which is a fairly stark experience, which really underscores the issue. So, Elaine, what does this look like across the bar?
Yes, so just firstly on the Supreme Court, I've had 4 cases listed in my diary for Supreme Court. None of them actually went all the way. So
it's just a matter of time.
Finally, I've made it tonight. But fingers crossed it does actually come to fruition. One of those cases lasts for me to appear. So basically, you've had a summary already about the statistics, but just to give you a little bit more, we we do, in terms of entry, in terms of access to the bar now, and there's been a lot of work around this. It very much ramped up after what happened with George Floyd, with a lot of chambers, a lot of the SBAs, the specialist bar associations, and even Inns of Court providing more sort of positive action, sort of assessed mini pupillages and programs to help for access to the bar. So we know that the rate of pupillage has improved, but there's still an issue between the pupillage and tenancy for black barristers. Now, the Bar Council has to track that more accurately, but we suspect and we understand anecdotally there is an issue. So there's that. But the bigger challenge, which still remains, is the retention and progression. So you need both to ensure that you have a wider pool of black barristers for senior appointments. What we know at the Bar Council is when you track money, that does tell a story. So some of that is to do with earnings, some of that is to do with perception of barristers, black barristers. And so, for example, the fact that black barristers are more likely to be bullied can be an issue in terms of not only whether or not you stay at the bar, but whether or not you can get someone to be your referee. It's very difficult to ask a judge or an opponent to write a reference for you if you have just been bullied by them. So some of these issues are barriers. And so what we have in terms of the statistics are that we do see, as I said, access, we do see a broadly reflective statistic in terms of the number of barristers reflecting what we see in society. But when you look at the bar generally, for black British backgrounds in particular, there is a underrepresentation between ethnicity. So it's about 3.4% for barristers to 3.8% in society. So there is a difference there. Whereas when you look at other groups, you sometimes see an overrepresentation. So in terms of Asian and Asian British individuals, it's a slight overrepresentation, 7.9% versus 7%. So there is a difference there overall. And then when you look at seniority, the difference is perhaps more pronounced because non-KCs at the bar who are black, who are ethnic minorities, is 16.3%. And then for KCs, it's 10% generally. So there's a disparity there. And of course, the percentage for black KCs is lower as well. And then it's lower, especially for women. So as we know, and it was actually reported in the Race at the Bar report, there's effectively a handful of black women silks at the bar. So, and I think we can all understand that there's an intersect between race and sex, which black women occupy, which means that their progression and their trajectory is slower. So it quite often takes black women longer to progress to silk if they do, and it's in lower numbers. So the position is that, there is more reflective numbers at the bar in terms of society, but when you look at progression to the senior positions, then we have an issue. And that's reflected in the judiciary. And it's the same position as what Stephanie said for solicitors. Generally in terms of black applicants are more likely to apply, but less likely to be appointed. So that's the same position that we see for judiciary. And as we know, there is no black judge that is, as I understand it, full-time in the High Court or above. So that's where the bottleneck is. So in terms of tribunals, lower courts and magistrates' courts, there's pretty much good diversity, but that falls off to the senior appointments. Yeah.
Okay.
There is one judge of some dual heritage or with.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that's a really interesting point because when you look at mixed heritage, the statistics are different. In fact, there's more likely to be slight overrepresentation as compared to black. So that does go back to what you said, Harry, about perceptions, because it's quite subtle, but yet when you extrapolate all the figures, there is this difference between mixed heritage and black barristers in their progression, both in the profession and in the judiciary.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, of course, a Black Talent Charter isn't specific to law, certainly not specific to the bar, and we see exactly the same trends across every sector. So it is not a unique problem in law or the bar. So many of the same barriers potentially. But Harry, finally coming to you for your observations on why this matters.
Why this matters, I'll lean into, if I may, what Lord Reid and Lord Leggett have said, but before doing that, just commenting on the statistics that Elaine has given us. We can be blinded by statistics if we look at too many of them at once. And it seems to me that if there's one set of statistics that we and anybody listening must hold very firmly in our minds, it is the statistic that Laura gave us earlier, which is that if we do nothing at all, or we continue to proceed at the pace at which we are travelling at the moment, it will take us, according to the research that Bain & Company, one of our signatory firms, has done, it will take us at least 70 years to reach proportional representation in finance and the professions, proportional to the percentage of black people in the UK working population. We will all be long done with our careers. Some of us may be long done with this life before that is reached. And the statistic which Stephanie gave us about how it will take over a century to see proportional representation of black professionals in the judiciary. We are on a burning platform. We can't afford to be gradualist about this. So that's my first reflection, and it is an earnest one and an urgent one. We cannot be gradualist. We cannot be gradualist because, as Lord Reid and Lord Leggett have said, it really matters that there is underrepresentation of black professionals in the judiciary. It matters really for the reasons they have given. And if I may perhaps fly a kite, one which I flew in a podcast with Lord Leggett some time ago, which I'm not sure gained huge altitude, but I'll try again. It is really important because there is, if we do nothing, a danger of the perception of disenfranchisement of a sector of society, the black community, from the criminal and the civil justice system. That is a very large statement to make. But when will it be that the black community is satisfied that, for example, sentencing practice is conducted by people who have a real understanding of the black community and the challenges it faces? When will it be that, for example, on the issue of reasonableness, which is a pervasive concept in the civil justice system, black litigants will be questioning whether or not the judiciary, which has the discretion and the ability to decide the facts as to whether or not, for example, there is reasonableness in the employment context, which Elaine is a specialist in, or in relation to issues of dishonesty, where in the civil justice common law, dishonesty has an objective element. When will it be that a sector of the community will lose faith, as Lord Reid has and Lord Leggett have said, in the ability of our judiciary to fairly decide those issues? In my view, this is something which we can be could have been sanguine about in 2019, but in a post-Floyd era, when everybody is conscious, despite what some politicians may wish, everybody is conscious of the disparities between various segments of our society. When will it be that we will pick up the pace and recognise that we have to do this because the genie is out of the bottle? It seems to me that all those issues make it absolutely imperative that we not only continue on this road, but that we accelerate the work that we are doing and that it be done collectively. One firm won't do it, one set of chambers won't do it. This is a societal and a sectoral problem, and we must all come together at pace to deal with it.
Thank you, Harry. So, I think we've got a fairly coherent argument that this focus is required, and that it certainly matters for the judiciary, for society, which is very positive given what we're trying to do for the Black Talent Charter. But I'm very aware that everyone in the room and everyone online will also be looking at this panel and thinking, how did they get there? And wow, aren't they brilliant? And we'll want to hear from them on some personal observations about their careers, some general observations about the sector and what has occurred in their careers that has allowed them to progress, support from peers. I'm sure there are lots of different things. So Elain, coming to you first, I would love your thoughts on what works.
Well, just from my own experience, I came from a background that, nobody in my family was a lawyer. But I decided as a very young girl, about 7, I was going to be a barrister. And I grew up on a council estate in Hackney. So there were not any role models around for me. And when I asked my school about it, they had no idea. In fact, I taught them, when I had my career session, I explained how to become a barrister, and the teacher was, slow down, so I can take a note, and I can, help others. So I was very self-directed, but I was inspired, and I was very fortuitous in the sense that when I was about 16 or 17, I won an award and I met Gus John. And Gus John was then the director of education in Hackney. And he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a barrister. He said, we've got to meet Courtney Griffiths. And he introduced me to Courtney. And I've known him ever since. And that was before he became a Silk. And he did take me under his wing when I was about 17 and just take me into spaces, talk to me, introduce me to people. I remember going to his chambers. I remember going to dine with him at events, and it really, really helped and inspired me. And I went to his Silks party. So, I think mentorship was a big thing for me. And there's been several barristers that I'm really fortunate to say have, helped me along the way. And that's one of the reasons why I personally feel it's important to give back in that way with mentorship. The other thing that I think's helped me, because I've been able to cultivate a specialist practice whilst not being in a specialist set of chambers, and how I've done that was that I've been fortunate enough to be good at networking. And I think networking has been another thing that I've been able to utilise to build my practice and to build networks which do support me, not only in work, but also in terms of moral support. Because we know also one of the things that helps you at the bar is to have support in terms of not just your practice, but also well-being. So if you can find your people, and that may be a specialist bar association, it may be your inn, it may be other groups which are more specific. We've got groups like Black Women in Law, Black Men in Law, and being involved with groups like that, it's difficult to say why they're so helpful, but all I can say is it is a source of strength, information, and it will help you in your career if you have those networks available that you can lean into and draw from when you need to. So I would say it's a combination of factors for me that helped me to establish my career and develop my career at the bar.
Thank you. Stephanie, from your perspective, what have been the things that have worked and have supported you, and what have you seen generally in the sector?
Gosh, so the things that have worked, I can't echo Elain's point enough, in as much that those networks, and that's something I say all the time, but I'm in no doubt that I could not have got to where I've got to today without the all-important networks, people who were advocating for me, speaking up for me, known and unknown. And, you know, when people say to me now, you know, well, Stephanie, what can we do for you? I always say, speak my name in rooms that I'm not in. And I think that's so powerful that, you know, people will speak your name when you're not there. So what's worked for me? Tenacity, you know, determination, resilience. You know, I've spoken lots about the fact it took me 4 attempts to get to where I've got to, or to become president. Never given up. You know, but getting into action, it didn't land on my lap. I had to work for it. I had to advocate for it. I had to get uncomfortable for it in order that I could get comfortable. And despite the fact it took me 4 attempts, I would have kept going. The 5th, the 6th, the 7th, I don't care how many times. And I see a couple of colleagues here in the room from council. I would have kept going, if nothing else, just to irritate the hell out of everyone, because I had a vision, you know, I had a dream, and it was to become president, because I knew that once I got there, that, you know, it would give me a remarkable platform that could amplify my voice. And certainly when I stepped down a year ago, and I told people, this is not it. This is not the end of it, Stephanie Boyce. You know, and I have gone on within that year to continue to make lots of noise and advocate in different spaces, because, you know, lots of what we're talking about this evening, the work is not complete. It's not done. And quite rightly, there is so much more to be done, because as we've heard, you know, the determinants should be your skills, your ability, aptitude, not your background. It shouldn't matter where you come from or what you look like or whatever, how you sound. That should not determine how you are treated in our society, how far you can go, or where you should end up. So things that have worked really well, me becoming president. You know, when I became, when I was campaigning to become president, one of the questions, as I remember it, that I was asked, that the 4 of us was asked, and the night before we'd been given a report, council had been given a report, and in that report, it gave me every statistic why, as a black female in the solicitor profession, was the least likely to succeed. So the question, as I remember being asked, is, if you are successfully elected as Deputy Vice President, and then it's an automatic trajectory to go on to become Vice President and President, if you are successfully elected, how will you promote diversity, equality, diversity and inclusion? And I'm looking out at my cohort of colleagues who are going to vote for me, who are going to elect me. And I had written in big capital letters the word smile on a piece of paper, but I'd also written the words of Dorothea Brand that said, act as though it were impossible to fail. And so I was the second person to answer, and when it came to me, with a big grin on my face and looking at this piece of paper, I said, how am I going to promote equality, diversity, inclusion? I'm going to role model it. I'm going to be visible. And that is exactly how I have spent my time, being visible, trying to lead by example. So there have been lots of things that work really well, but we're still not where we ought to be. And whilst that continues to be the issue, lots of us will continue to do what we're doing to make the right noises. But of course, you know, like the old proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and it's going to take all of us to do all of this together.
Wow. So follow-up question, if I may. Increasingly, I think people look at business, the legal profession, and they think, you know, maybe they start in a law firm, maybe they start at the bar, and they think, they don't want me, I don't want them, I'm off. I'm going to go and work in tech, or, you know, whatever it is. And I hear that so often. And part of the challenge, part of the reason why we have this disparity is people are voting with their feet, and attrition levels are higher if you are black, and people think, you know, I'm not wanted in that room, so fine. So how do you, what is the answer you would give to people who are thinking about voting with their feet and calling it, from someone who refused to do that?
Well, 4 attempts. The fact was, you know, somebody said to me the last night or the night before I stepped down, somebody said, why did it take so long? And of course I said, because they couldn't see what I could see. And so you've got to be in it to win it, to be the change that you want to see. And it is going to be difficult. And lots of people said to me, I should have taken the hint after the first attempt. And I said, what hint though? It wasn't mine to take. And they would have been not as richer for it if I hadn't been in the position on that platform to be able to amplify different messages. And the point that Harry makes about his work starting before George Floyd. I was elected before George Floyd, but I'm grateful to the then President Simon Davis, and as I understand it, when the press was calling up the Law Society because they wanted to speak to me about my experience of institutional racism in the profession, I said I'm not interested in talking about my experience of institutional racism in the profession. There'll be plenty of other people who will be happy to do that. But what I want to talk about is that by the time I leave office, that there is change, measurable, actionable change. And so we set about gathering together our colleagues at the Bar Standards Board, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, SILEX. We met with the Supreme Court, Lord Reed and Vicky, who's been a great advocate. And we started calling together parts of the legal profession, because it wasn't just a solicitor issue profession. It is a legal profession issue, but it's a wider issue amongst the financial services, amongst the professional services, that for a number of reasons, that if you happen to come from a certain background, if you happen to belong to a certain demographic, you are not progressing as quickly or at all in some instances as other colleagues. And that, as I say, in our society, a society such as ours, it's not right, it's not okay.
Thank you. So, Harry, tenacity, being the first.
Indeed.
How has that been in your career?
Not straightforward, but I'll tell you where I come from, which is a very different place from Elaine and Stephanie. I, as my accent will tell you, am the product of a very expensive education, which was the legacy of African parents for whom education of their children was everything. And I owe them a debt which I cannot repay, but I can do my best by pursuing my career in the best way I can. So I come from a very different place, a private education which has given me all the advantages of social capital, of networks that Elaine and Stephanie never had when they were starting out. And yet, I have also experienced the bias and the stereotyping which every person of black heritage experiences, particularly in this sector of work. The stereotype tells you that we are good at running and jumping and dancing and singing, but we can't do the clever stuff. And when I started at the bar way back when, there were judges less well trained than they are today who showed it visibly on their faces when they saw a non-English name and they saw a non-white face, that the case that was going to be argued before them was going to be a car crash. Of course, when I started speaking in a sentence with an easy familiarity with a semicolon, they completely changed and I got everything that I wanted, by and large, in front of those judges. There were more astute judges for whom that didn't work. But that was an experience with which I was familiar at the beginning of my career. And solicitors in those early days, I was told by my clerks, had not selected me for a high-profile brief because they thought that their client wouldn't want a black barrister acting for them. And again, solicitors are better trained and more astute than that nowadays, but one never knows whether the unspoken is still true. It never goes away. But there is nothing as painful as a black client who doesn't choose a black professional for that reason. And that has happened to me in silk. It doesn't go away. The stereotype is so deeply ingrained. So Laura, how do I deal with that? 3 things. Hold yourself to a standard. As a black professional, you've got to hold yourself to a standard. You may not always attain that standard, but if you don't hold yourself to that in everything that you do, in every way that you act as a professional, things will be harder because you will lose your own self-respect. And that's something that I learned from my parents, and it has carried me through a 30-year career. Second point, focus on your client. Whatever happens, the best thing that I have always been told is when clients say, particularly when I've lost a case, at least you put my case. At least I know that you really worked hard to put my case to the judge. And that can be, you can get no better compliment than that. Now, the third thing is embrace who you are. A lot of black professionals, and this is no criticism at all, a lot of black professionals, I used to be one of them in the old days, would say, don't put me above the parapet. I just want to do the work. I don't want to be the black one. But I reckon that in a post-Floyd era, there is safety in being the black one. Not only safety, but there is a duty to be the black one. And you can be helped to do that by coming to gatherings like this. Embrace the community of black professionals who walk in the same shoes, who share the same burden, who travel together, particularly in this world when we have so many allies, like the ones you have in this building, so many allies wishing to help and to be taught and to walk together with us. It's such a shame if we all just stay in our bunkers and we don't want to be counted. Let's all walk together and we will help ourselves, our well-being will improve, but my goodness, what we will do for the cause is enormous. That's what I'd suggest.
And Harry, if you had to pick out moments where you have been assisted through those difficult, the realization as to why you haven't been selected for a case, or I didn't explain, but I used to be a solicitor. I was a client, and I always found it interesting when pulling together a team of barristers, the euphemisms that sometimes were thrown. That person is a risk. Are they a team player? And so often those sorts of things are descriptions of women, minorities that for whatever reason haven't been viewed as part of a particular group, club, which I always used to challenge from the position of being a client, but you just sometimes see it. I mean, when you have those moments, what has helped you get through those?
Very good question. Holding myself to a standard. I come back to that again and again and again. You examine yourself, you question yourself, and I think this is common for everybody, regardless what heritage, particularly at the bar, which is such a gladiatorial profession in a way. We all question ourselves. But if as a black professional you have held yourself to a standard and have met that standard, regardless of what others people say, at least I can go away from a case or a bad experience and look myself in the mirror. If you can't do that, then you are in trouble. And the other thing is, have another life. It's not easy, but you can't just keep working twice as hard. That old familiar phrase. Post-Floyd, we've got to change, people. We've got to change. We've got to have another life. We've got to be able to enjoy music, sport, whatever it is that really makes your soul sing. The work will always be there, but what makes your soul sing? And if you've got those two things, then I think, hard as the road may be, sometimes you may glide across it.
Thank you. And Elaine, do you have any other observations on Harry's experiences?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, a lot of that chimes with me. I think, as black barristers, we do experience rejection, but we build resilience on the flip side of that. And if we can draw on our strong networks, we can actually make and insulate our practices quite well. So there is a positive from that. And I just wanted to bring something from my employment and equality law experience, because I do equality work outside of employment. So absolutely, across all sectors, education, housing, policing, health, for example, you find the same disparities. And across all employment sectors, you do find that black professionals are actually overqualified, underpromoted, more likely to be dismissed, and more likely to be disciplined. And so what happens at the bar is actually what's happening in society, and that's very, very clear. And so this point about working twice as hard is something that we see, because some of what we're seeing in the statistics is that where some people are promoted on potential, that's less likely to happen to black professionals across the board. In fact, they have to be performing at that level or beyond to be appointed. And so there is this being subjected to a higher standard that is happening. And so what I find interesting about this is speaking to younger professionals coming up in the profession and aspiring barristers who are aware of this and are really wanting to attack that. And what's interesting as well is hearing some of them say, well, you know, why go to the bar at all? Why not go elsewhere? Why not go in finance? Why not become a commercial solicitor? And I think there's an issue about the fact that we can lose some very talented, dynamic individuals who look at the difficulties at progression at the bar and think, why should I even put myself in that? And that's why it's really important that the profession does more to ameliorate this disparity, because it's fundamentally important that we have got access to progression that is actually attainable for a number of individuals who are very talented but are potentially being subjected to this higher standard.
Yeah. Okay, I'm mindful that we need to get on to questions, but I do have a final question. So thinking about senior leadership, what would you say they should be thinking about? You know, one or two things to sustain action and remove barriers, to see the barriers and then sustain action. Stephanie, can I come to you first on that?
Well, senior leaders set the tone for an organisation, and so it's incumbent upon senior leaders to drive change, EDI, at all levels. But what we're also hearing is that culture within organisations, firms, businesses makes a difference. And if the culture isn't right, it doesn't matter what policies, procedures, initiatives you have in place. If the culture isn't right, change isn't going to come. So, you know, organisations and senior leaders need to look at the culture of the business. And is it a culture that imbues diversity, inclusion, because we can all say it, but is it really happening? So it's imperative that those at the top of the tree, if you like, understand and enable those at the bottom to be able to work up. And there's also an issue around the succession pipeline, because there's not enough talent being allowed to come through. And one of the things that we hear all the time is around individuals who say the road to partnership it's not transparent. People have no idea how they get there, how people are elevated, promoted there. I've heard a number of instances where somebody said 12, 15 years to become a partner, and I say, well, if you had said to me, Stephanie, it's going to take you 12 years to become president of the Law Society, what do you think I would have done? I wouldn't have sat there for 12 years. I've got better things to do. But the whole point here is, but somebody would have said 12 years, but there isn't that transparency around people even knowing it's going to take 12 years or what needs to happen. So senior leaders need to look at, there's lots of things they need to look at. They need to look at the billable structure. I think we need to be more creative and innovative in the way that we work as firms, and the way that people are given work. We know that's an issue, the way that work is allocated. But as I say, work, allocation, the culture of the organisation, transparency around promotion and so forth, and getting to partnership level, and all those hidden barriers that we have to navigate and are expected to navigate our way around, but we don't even know that they're there. We don't even know what they are.
Yeah, and not asking the minorities to fix the culture for them, the hard job.
Yeah.
Bringing in laterals to fix it. So, Elaine, what are your observations for leaders?
Absolutely. I think culture is really important. You can't... So for a culture change, you need awareness of an issue and intention to change. And you can't really make change across any of these metrics without a change in culture. It just won't last. So one of the things that we certainly advocate the Bar Council, and I think there's more understanding around that, is that we need targets, because targets are really helpful. It's something tangible that you can look at your data, and if you want to improve a certain demographic, you can set yourself a target, you can measure yourself against that target, and if you don't meet the target, you can understand why you didn't meet it and what you need to do to get there. Now, targets are very different to quotas, and they're often confused, but it's important that we focus on targets, because quotas are just there to confuse everybody and to distract us from the real issue of targets. Nobody's asking for quotas, and quotas, as we know, are actually unlawful under the Equality Act, so we can't advocate for those. But targets will create that intention, and that's what we need to really see change. So I think, yes, we need to talk about things. We need to have groups within the bar, within all employment sectors, that are helping to support people so that they can advance their careers. But within that as well, we certainly, I would say, we'd need some targets to measure ourselves.
Thank you.
In progress.
Harry, what would you say?
I agree with all of that, Laura. What gets measured gets done, is what they always say. Targets are crucial. But we've got to change the whole culture of our professions to allow minoritized groups, and particularly black talent, to not just come to the bar and to the solicitor's side, but to progress, to stay, to see a career, to see it as a career, not just as a job. We've got to have a fundamental cultural change. And that leads me to, I think, the most important message that I want to give to the profession, particularly my side of the profession, all the self-employed barristers out there who have the habit and the culture of saying every person for themselves, and maybe God for us all, but I will work hard and I will take the fruits of my labour. And that is for me. What about legacy? And we've heard Lord Reid and Lord Leggett talk about the importance of, to the whole profession and to the whole of the law, of improving diversity. But there's another thing. The legal profession is in competition for diverse, excellent talent with so many other sectors now. There are jobs being created which didn't exist 10 years ago, and that is going to accelerate with AI and whatever other technological advances. We cannot, as a profession, stand still and be comfortable in the conservative past that we have enjoyed for so long as a respected profession. That is breaking down, and we mustn't be complacent about it. And if we are complacent about it, I can see, as Stephanie has said, as Elaine has said, that the really good young black talent will drift away into tech in particular. And I've had an experience of one person, a brilliant young black student, law student, who was thinking of coming to the commercial bar, and we met and had a drink, and I urged him to apply. And then a tech firm came and talked to him. And it wasn't the money. He wasn't being paid that much more money. But he had a real feeling that he had a job and a career that he would enjoy and which would fulfill him. And we're not giving a vision of that to our young black talent at the moment at this side of, in these professions. And I think that's a real worry. We've got to stop looking at ourselves at the bar as self-employed individuals only, but we've got to think of the legacy and of the good of the profession as a whole. If we do that, then we start to solve the problems of lack of representation and increase diversity of intake and retention.
Thank you, Harry. Strong message for leaders from everyone. So, Lord Leggatt, coming to you for the final word before we go to Q&A.
Well, when I think about this, I start by thinking not what I should be telling others to do, but what can I do, or what can we, as the Supreme Court here, do, because that's what's most important and within our power. And in the Supreme Court, we recognise that we have a leadership responsibility and a role that we can play. And I think that takes two forms. First is that we can speak publicly and emphasise the importance of the problems that we're discussing this evening. And we can show that we think that they matter and why they matter, and demonstrate our commitment to improvement. And a tangible example of that, Lord Reid mentioned at the beginning, is us becoming signatories, as we have, of the Black Talent Charter. And I hope that is one example of the kind of message that we can send to the fact that we think that it matters. And the second thing that we can do is, which we try to do, there are only 12 of us, and we have a pretty busy job to do, but we don't have much spare time, but we all have a commitment to outreach work of one kind or another, speaking to students, speaking to lawyers in their careers. And in the course of that work, we can help, or I hope we can help, by encouraging people who might not have thought that a legal career was for them, that it is and can be for them, to encourage them to enter the profession, to persist, to consider applying for judicial appointment. I mention one small example because it's particularly relevant tonight. There's something some of you may know about called the Stephen Lawrence Scholarships, which is I think 15 scholars every year. They are black men, first-year students at university and law, and there's a scholarship that helps to mentor them and give them work experience through university and equip them to enter a successful legal career. And the Stephen Lawrence Scholars came to the court for a day a couple of months ago. They spent the day here watching a case, and I had a question and answer session with them. My judicial assistant looked after them, and a very impressive group they were. And as a result of that and the satisfaction I got from it, something I want to do again every year. So there are initiatives like that that we can do. But I would say that there's a limit to what we can do at, as it were, the apex of the legal profession. To get to the Supreme Court, somebody's first got to become a High Court judge in practice and then a Court of Appeal judge. And if they're going to get into the area where they have a good prospect of getting an appointment, and it's worth considering it, they've got to have worked their way up for many years through the legal profession. And so I would say, although it's not for me to do, that the legal professions do need to recognise the responsibilities they have to foster and support black talent. And I'm very encouraged to hear about the work that Stephanie's been doing at the Law Society. And I hope that the Bar is doing, as it certainly should be doing, similar things. What I would like to hear about is what you think we should be doing anyway, that we aren't already, and I hope we're going to be doing that soon.
Yes, wonderful. So thank you very much. That was a very interesting discussion, sobering but also inspiring. So I would love to hear from the audience. Any questions, please do just put your hands up. We have a roving mic. Yes, this gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Sam De Silva. I'm a partner at CMS, probably one of the few, if the minority partners at city law firms, as the KC said. I'll be interested to see what the panel's view is in the role of clients, particularly in commercial law, in driving change, because most commercial law is a business, and law firms want to make money. money is generated by clients. So, the role of GCs, in-house counsel, FDs, CEOs in, selecting law firms and even, barristers, I guess, indirectly. I think that's one area that hasn't been sort of touched upon. So I'll be interested in the panel's view and, in that perspective.
So I was a client for almost a decade with quite a large budget spend. I think I was working for the most sued organisation in the country, which was not great, busy. We were asking panel firms for their diversity metrics, but generally they're all much for muchness, if I'm perfectly honest. And as far as black representation goes, very poor. And I think being aware of what happens behind the scenes. I also was a partner at a law firm. You need to pull together a roster of often cases for cases. You send an email around saying who's used who recently, were they any good? You get a short list of 5, those go to the client. The client's got no time to challenge and finesse. It's this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy where if you don't know, you don't know. And then you have to work a lot harder to look harder and find the talent. And that often means the people who are not automatically and seamlessly being brought into the room. Does anyone else have any other views on that?
Well, I've got one, just I learned recently, which is losing touch perhaps with the legal profession, but I learned to my pleasant surprise recently that a policy that a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some city law firms have when they're instructing barristers, is that they insist that there's at least one woman in the barristers' team.
Yes.
Now that is a positive thing which could progress into diversity of other kinds, and there must be potential there.
I was going to refer to that because the Inns of Court Alliance for Women, we had an event where we looked at that, and there are city firms, you're right, who have targets for instructing women, and so the question is, can they extend that, and why don't they extend that in terms of ethnicity? It would be one way of at least measuring if there's any progress being made. So.
And we're seeing that in the international arbitration field, where there is a pledge for arbitral appointments that women be selected for those appointments. And so firms who make that pledge will insist on rosters of our potential arbitrators, including women, and the actual tribunal, including women as well. Again, as Lord Legate says, that is right for other forms of diversity.
Yes, so it's a discussion that we are having with our signatories as well. It is something people ask for diversity of suppliers increasingly, and being a bit braver on it. People are a little bit squeamish about race. They find it really difficult to identify people as racial minorities, to open the discussion and say, are people willing to identify themselves? There's the cultural question. You have to do a bit of work to make people feel comfortable to have the discussion. So it is more difficult than the gender question.
Yeah.
Yes, question at the back. We've got 2 questions, actually. We'll take both the questions and then we'll answer. So there's the gentleman here and then at the back.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Kevin, by the way. From just experiences of just like going to networking events and seeing lawyers and just having conversations with black lawyers, I feel like there's kind of this pressure to like kind of in law, especially around the bar, to like know yourself down and just put your head down, don't be noticed, just wear a suit, don't say anything, and just like even in certain sectors, like even the corporate field, I feel like you're kind of this kind of part in this corporate machine, and then once you're used, the company kind of forgets about you. So it's just, how would you say like how someone can have like a sustainable career as a black lawyer and like how they can succeed? Because I do agree with the man there about holding yourself to a high standard.
Yeah, thank you. We'll cover that in a moment, and we'll just take the other question at the back.
Good evening, it's Kyle Blackburn, Chair of the Black Solicitors Network. So specifically on the question of appointments of judges, there was a report published by the Ministry of Justice earlier this year which looked at those that are actually applying from a black background for judicial careers. There certainly isn't a shortage of candidates actually applying, and what the report has found is that of those black candidates who are eligible, compared to the white counterparts, only 25% were actually recommended. And since, I think, 2014, the number of black judges has remained at roughly 1%. That hasn't really changed. So what we can see is that there isn't necessarily a problem with the candidates coming through. And as Lord Leggett says, that even at the apex of the Supreme Court, that they feel that there is really only limited input that they can have. In reality, what hope does anybody really have to change things? And is there a question actually in terms of the Judicial Appointments Commission, in terms of how candidates are being recommended? And does that actually need to be reviewed fundamentally?
Yeah, thank you. I guess, Stephanie, this is, we'll cover both those questions, but Stephanie, I guess this is what you were thinking about when you were talking earlier.
Well, absolutely, and not wanting to repeat much of that, but absolutely, that is about the way that the JAC, in my view, needs to look at the whole appointments process. It needs to, and I've called for previously that statutory consultation should be removed. I don't believe that it has any place within a fair, open, allegedly a fair, open recruitment process. And when individuals are being asked to explain away statutory consultations, and we also had a concept of non-statutory consultation, which was something that I didn't even know about until, as you know, it landed on my desk as president, and then I got into trouble because I told everybody that I was a non-statutory consultee when I'd understood that I wasn't supposed to say anything. But I very publicly said that I was not going to partake in that process because I didn't believe in it, where I'm being asked as president of the Law Society to give my thoughts and understanding on certain individuals for judicial appointment, people who I didn't know. So statutory consultations need to be looked at, non-statutory consultations, and when we wrote and asked for an explanation, we were told this is what statutory consultations are and this is what it does. So I wrote back and said, yeah, but you haven't mentioned non-statutory consultations. So where is the statute around those? And what does the statute... And of course I knew there was no statute anyway, because by their very name they're called non-statutory consultations. But challenging that process. And indeed the whole, you know, we get the judicial statistics, diversity statistics every September, is it? You know, and of course the Law Society has been quite critical in the past around that, and around the action plan that actually hasn't really taken us any further in terms of diversifying the judiciary. So we've got to look at all of those. The appointment process, we've got to look at removal of statutory consultation, and all of those other hidden barriers that probably exist that maybe we don't know about, that is preventing talent from getting through. You know, that feeds into all of those things that make a difference to people's lives, and impacts on people's, at times, you know, freedoms.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment? I know it's not anyone's responsibility here.
Just briefly to Kyle's point, I've commented on our friend at the front, my points about feed your soul. You can't just...
I would like to ask the first question. Are you a barrister yourself, or what's your career are you pursuing? You're a law student, right. Which profession are you planning to enter? You keep your options open at the moment, are you? Okay.
It's not all bad, I should say. It's not all bad. And in fact, why have I been doing this for 30 plus years? It's a great profession if you get it right. It's demanding, but the rewards are wonderful. But look after yourself. And there's a lot more well-being work around the profession than there used to be. So be optimistic about that. Just to Kyle's point about judicial appointment, I think there's a genuine point about appointment to not just judiciary, to chambers, to law firms, which needs to be addressed. People say, well, we appoint by having objective criteria. But of course, it takes a subjective mind to assess those objective criteria in each case. I worry that sometimes those who are selecting choose objective criteria which themselves select out a group of people. So if you ask, have you got lots of postgraduate degrees, to take a slightly absurd example, but not entirely so, have you got a postgraduate degree? Well, that's going to select out people who can't afford to do postgraduate degrees. So objective criteria have to be very, very carefully set. And then, of course, you've got the subjective assessment, which in many cases, I fear, certainly at the bar in my experience, leads the assessors to look for self-validation. Oh, that person has had the same sort of educational course doing law and doing something else as I have. So I think they're going to be a better fit in this sort of work. And I think we need to be very, very careful about that. And if we can really examine ourselves on the criteria that we set for appointments ruthlessly, I think there's a chance of improving things.
Can I just say on that, on the criteria, because you can have objective criteria, but if along the way you're facing disparity and disadvantage and the actual discrimination is embedded in the process, you won't get an objective end and you'll get a disparate end. So even though the selection process may be as objective as possible, it doesn't occupy a vacuum. It's within society. And that's one of the problems that we face. We need to be really cognizant of how all these things interplay. And I would like to see a deep dive into all of these selection processes. I think that it's time to be done. And just going back to your point, the law student's point, it would be wrong of me not to really shout out Sharon Thomas, who's here tonight, and Black Council Forum, because this is an example of how you can have camaraderie in the profession and be surrounded in a room of hundreds of black lawyers, be it solicitors and barristers, including partners, everyone across from junior all the way up to the most senior, including Silk, some of whom are here tonight, and feel a real sense of achievement and belonging, which certainly I had never seen outside of the United States. So that exists here in the profession, and it's actually really important to understand that you have got those networks to tap into and that you're not alone. And it's really quite a powerful thing in terms of your well-being and your retention and progression.
Yep. I'm going to take a couple of the online questions and then we'll ask a few more in the room.
Thanks, Laura. I've got lots of questions here.
Yes, very good.
And quite a few about appointments, but I think I'll pick out a few that are about the start of people's career. So, Sunita has asked, if any of you have felt imposter syndrome in your legal careers, how have you looked after your own confidence? And Amazon Felix has asked, if you could start your career again as a 25-year-old today, what would you do differently?
Those are good questions. Any of us imposters? I think everyone's an imposter, aren't they?
Yes, I feel like an imposter every time I get a new case.
Yeah.
I think it goes with the territory at the bar. Others may think differently. But you, certainly in the work I do, you often think, oh goodness, am I going to get this right? It seems so enormous. But with time, you begin to get familiar with the way things are done, with the way papers appear. You get more confident as to what to look for. And once you actually start reading, the longest journey always begins with the first step. So imposter syndrome, I think, goes with the territory.
Yeah. Any advice for your 25-year-old self, Stephanie?
Gosh, I wrote myself I was asked this question from a panel I was doing last week, and it culminated in a letter to my younger self. I think there are lots of things that have placed me in good stead and has stuck with me throughout my career. And I think, at the end of the day, in the still of the night, when I'm there with my thoughts and myself, it's, there's lots of things. It's about being true to yourself. You're stronger than you think. I say to people all the time, run your own race, write your own story. There's lots of noise going around, going on, and that's a question that I'm asked lots with lots of noise going on. How do I, when other people are telling me to do this, to do that, or you should be this, because we hear lots of people saying such and such told me not to go into the legal profession because certain groups do not progress in the legal profession and so forth. And I was told exactly that, when I was running for president. I was told, go home and rest, you're embarrassing yourself. Never in our lifetime will we see an ethnic minority become president. Just imagine if I'd listened to all of that. We need someone who can converse with government, as if I can converse with government. All of those things. But the one thing at the end of the day was the belief that I had inside. And of course, my greatest example of imposter syndrome was probably when I was asked to share a stage with Hillary Clinton. I thought it was a scam, I couldn't believe that she'd want to share a stage with me, But and when I got on the stage, had all my notes and everything, and something just said to me, Stephanie, just put it down, put it away. And of course, there were times, of course, I remember one of the first times I spoke as Deputy Vice President in a major law firm. This chap at the end of it put his hand up and he said, listening to you has made me think that actually we have been looking in the wrong places, when we're looking to recruit and so forth. And of course, that's the bigger message, that diversity is found any and everywhere. There is lots of talent out there. And this voice that I have, I always had it. It was just that becoming president gave me an absolute platform to amplify it. But the whole point is, be absolutely true to yourself. You are, as I say, stronger than you think, and I think savour every moment as well. And of course, there will be times where you fall. But as I've always said, the lesson, and indeed, actually, it's the scriptures that says it rather than me, the lesson is not in how many times you got knocked down. It is in how did you get up. And it's important that when we fall, we get up. And we keep getting up and getting up. That's my 4 times.
Thank you. And could I ask Lord Leggett, sitting quietly at the end, I think sometimes we enter these rooms as minorities and think, well, it's me that feels as though I don't belong here. Did you always feel like these lovely green seats would be your natural home and somewhere you would spend this part of your career enjoying?
About that, but it's at the moment. I mean, I get up in the morning sometimes and I think, am I really a Supreme Court justice? I mean, when people call me Lord Leggett, it just seems unreal. Is that me that they're addressing? Perhaps one day I'll get used to it, but I'm not sure about that. I think everybody must feel it at many times and at many levels. Of course, if you don't have role models of your own colour, your own background to look to, that makes it all the harder, I'm sure. But it's not unique. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions because there was a flurry of hands. So we'll take the 3. I'll take the questions. I think we've got 4 in the room, and then we'll answer those, and then we'll do networking afterwards. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I'm Paula Dowling, and I'm from KPMG UK, and I'm a solicitor. I'm going to be cheeky and ask 2 really quick questions. The first one being, Harry mentioned it's good to also have a life in addition to our careers. How have you juggled, your careers and your families? The women, if you've had children, and I know this is not a prerequisite because this is not what we're made for, if you've had children, how have you handled that? Because I have seen a lot of female barristers tend to leave the bar after they've had families and feel as though they're not really catered to in that sense in their career. And then secondly, after Elaine mentioned the statistics of, a century, 70 years, that's quite scary given that the youngest generation is currently Generation Alpha and they're 13 years old. So to think they have to be 83 years old for things to change, what is there that we can do, if you were to give us each one piece of advice, that we can do, say, in the next 5-10 years to kind of speed this up?
Yeah. Great. Let's take all the questions in the room. So there was, in the front row. We had 2 in that row. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sharon Thomas. I'm the founder of the Black Council Forum. Thank you, Elaine, for the shout out. I just wanted to ask about the structure of the profession, particularly the bar, because I think that the profession was founded on the basis of, or suited to people of independent means, people that were good at making relationships, people that had contacts. And I think, when we're coming into a profession, there's a social mobility aspect to this as well. We're coming into a profession as a very small minority, then it is tricky. How do you attract black talent when they have other choices? What is the infrastructure or the scaffolding maybe that needs to be put in place? Does the panel have any specific suggestions around actions that could be taken to kind of get over some of those disadvantages that I think are just inherent in how the profession has been structured, how the profession has developed over the years?
Yeah, the economic and social capital. Great, we'll come to that in a second.
Hi, my question was slightly not related to the other question, but I was more curious as to, so one thing I've noticed, especially my name's Josh and I'm a solicitor at McFarlane's, I know you very well, and one thing that I've noticed is that the events like this and events that we have at McFarlane's at the law firm, they tend to be predominantly ethnic minorities who are at those events. So one area, for example, there's so many people here who I work with who I think if they were in the room, it would be so beneficial for them. But I've found that that's probably one area that I could maybe try and work on and try and encourage people who are not ethnic minorities to come to some of these events. But I've so far failed at doing that, and I'm wondering if any of you have had any experiences of trying to encourage and trying to get non-ethnic minorities actually in the room to attend these sorts of events and actually speaking up at work, about your experiences and about the things that you go through.
Yeah, I think that is related on social capital question. Let's take the lady behind Josh.
Thank you. My name's Afia. I've just qualified as a barrister. My question is, how do we engage regional black talent? I find that as we get further and further away from London, the lack of representation becomes more and more stark. So how do we tackle that? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a northerner. And the lady at the front. I know I don't sound it, but I am actually from Manchester.
Hi, Sharon actually asked part of my question. So when answering that question, could the panel also consider about retention at the bar? Because we hear about career progression, and also and I speak as one being at the bar, if you think about taking Silk and the appointment process there and the cost there, does that price black practitioners out of the market, which then has the knock-on effect, as we know from Lord Leggatt, I think it was who said, about the trajectory. If somebody wanted an appointment, High Court bench, Court of Appeal, and hopefully we see a black practitioner not too long in the distant future, but sitting in the Supreme Court, that trajectory sort of aligns itself with a sort of career progression one sees, or assumes, I say. So when we talk about sponsorship, funding for that, I don't know if there's any thoughts on that from the panel.
Yeah, yeah. Elaine, could I come to you first on combining the questions really around the structure of the profession and the barriers that inherently has in place, which obviously we need to unpick. We've thought about it a little bit, but the issues around economic, social capital, and the particular challenge you mentioned, black women, disproportionately affected, which also actually touches on the gender imbalance. I mean, what are your observations on how we can fix all of that?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
There is.
So, I mean, absolutely, you're right. The bar is a system of cultures and some of it, a lot of unspoken rules that act to favour and at the same time disadvantage others, not necessarily intentionally, it's just the way that it's been done. And so how do you counter that? You have to be very intentional in trying to do specific things around each aspect of those potential barriers. So in terms of outreach, you have to have very clear outreach programs and try and encourage people to come to the bar, because we're competing with all the different industries. We've heard from Harry as well, tech, we've got many startups, the financial sector, and so on and so on. But then you've also got to have very clear programs and initiatives that again will reach out to black students in terms of their pupillage and their early years. The first 7 years of practice at the bar are absolutely essential. And so again, for young black barristers, it's a make or break time. And so they do need support in those first crucial 7 years. And then, of course, as was mentioned earlier before as well, in terms of retaining barristers further along in their career so that they can become part of the pool for senior appointments, whether it's silk or judiciary, and senior judicial appointments. So all of that's interrelated. There needs to be quite a sustained campaign that's intentional, so that at each point along the way there is a support network that will help you to retain your position in your career so you can advance. And so I think a lot of that, like I say, it's programs, initiatives, but then it's also the whole sort of networking and mentoring and support that can help you understand how to do it, to learn from others who did do it. And I think we are seeing a lot more of that learning and sharing. And I think someone else also mentioned tonight about the allyship that's needed. That's really important as well. Because if we're just talking amongst ourselves, that's brilliant, but we need to get the message out there so we can get more buy-in and people can actually empower themselves by being allies. And that's a really important thing. And we can all be allies, but I think we do need to have, other ethnicities involved in this debate and playing an active part in it. The other thing I wanted to say, just on that point about, what should we do and reflecting on what you would give advice to, there's a point about working hard. It just isn't enough. You've got to work smart. And I think that the earlier you realise that, the better. And you can learn from how some other groups operate. So, for example, if you look at white men, they're far more likely to be strategised about who sees their work and when. And so, for example, trying to be a partner in a law firm, to be very strategized about that, to set yourself a target. I want to get from X to Y within so many years, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to ask this person to mentor me because they've done it and they can help me. So I think there's a need to be quite strategized and work smart, and to not just be doing the work, but be doing the work on your career and your advancement. And I think often that, sometimes that's something that we can do a bit better in terms of our professions. So those are just some other points.
I'm mindful that everyone's probably having sugar loaves and that there's food outside, and everyone's going to be here for a little bit longer to answer questions outside. I hope that was a very comprehensive view. The gender question, I think, will take quite a lot of unpicking, so I think we might take that outside if that's okay. But thank you very much for all of the questions, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. Please do stick around, and that networking that we described as so important.
Can I say something before we wind up?
Absolutely.
I just sitting here listening and taking part, I just wanted to say a thought that occurred to me. I hope you won't go away with a sort of negative feeling from this evening, because we've talked quite a lot, inevitably, about disadvantages that black lawyers face and barriers to career progression. And of course, it's right that we discuss those and think about what can be done about that, but I hope you take away predominantly the positive message. Elaine talked importantly about the benefits of camaraderie and mutual support, and I hope that this event can perhaps provide for some of you a bit of that, but also I hope it will give you a feeling when you go away that to believe in your own talents. And if you have setbacks, and if they're sometimes unfair, to realise it's not because that you lack talent, but it's because of the problems you face. But I hope that this event will predominantly help you to affirm and recognise your own self-worth, because that is a fundamental thing to preserve if you're going to keep going in your profession and have a satisfactory and fulfilling and successful career. So I hope you take away that message from this evening and not a negative one.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can all be more Stephanie. I'm going to do it. That's what I've taken away. Thank you very much. Yeah. Drink some food outside. We will see you.